off we go.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. So hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today, where we are delighted to have our higher education specialists, Kuldip and Nicola, who will be discussing the challenges and benefits of digital transformation within HE. Before we move on to the introductions, just to set a few house rules. If you can everybody keep their mics muted and cameras off, that'd be great. We've got a Q&A time allocation slot at the end, but if you have any immediate questions, please feel free to use the chat function and we can pick them up at the end and take things from there. We can go on to the next slide, please, Kuldip.
Yep.
Perfect. So for those who don't know me, my name is Harrison Southwold Knights. I'm one of the senior recruitment consultants here at Real Staffing, overseeing the area of project management and business change. So as you can see on our screen, just to give you sort of an overview of Real Education, we've been recruiting into the higher education sector for over a decade. We work with 90% of the universities across the UK and Ireland, with some of the biggest clients in front of you there. So the likes of University of Manchester, University of Kent, LSE, University of Portsmouth, Imperial College London, University of Birmingham, just to put sort of a few of their names out there. On our team, we've got 19 market specialist consultants, which cover the following areas of student systems and VLE, IT infrastructure, project management and business change, academic services, HR, finance and payroll systems, marketing, digital and web development, as well as BI and data warehousing. I'll hand over to my colleague Molly now for a further introduction. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Harrison, and hello everybody. As you can see, I work alongside Harrison, heading up our Projects and Change division here at Real Staffing, and we specialise in placing interims in universities across the UK within Projects and Change. As you can see here, we have a list of the roles that we typically look to recruit for: project sponsor, project programme and portfolio managers, change and transformation managers, business analysts, project support and PMOs. There will be a slide at the end of the presentation with all of our contact details. So if anyone does have any further questions, please do reach out and we'll be more than happy to help. But for now, I'll hand you over to our specialist speakers, Kuldip and Nicola, who have very kindly volunteered to take us through their insights on digital transformation. Thank
you, Harrison and Molly, for being our host and introducing us to this webinar session. By way of introduction, my name's Kuldip Sandhu. I've been in the digital and IT transformation space for a long time, seems 26 odd years. My most recent roles have been as a fractional CIO, and I am a digital and IT transformation practitioner. And I use the word practitioner because not only do I design, strategize, but I actually go about implementing the change so that you can realize the benefits that institutions and business organizations dearly like. I've worked in the public and private sector for, as I said, 26 odd years. Some of my HE experience, some of the universities I've worked with, University of Durham, Cambridge University, University of London international programs, and more recently, I've done a small piece of work at University of Manchester as well. So significant HE experience and transformation experience. So, and I'm delighted to be here to just give you some of my thoughts and clarity around how to make digital transformation a success. Over to Nicola. I hope you can, you are there, Nicola.
Yes, thanks, Kuldip, and thanks, Molly and Harrison, for the introductions and also the invite to come and talk to you. A bit of background about me. Sort of nearly 30 years experience in sort of program project management space, all in the public sector, and most recently have done some work with the University of Reading, which I'll talk about in a bit. And I've just finished as Programme Director of the Census Data Collection and Transformation Programme with the Office for National Statistics, and I was responsible for the build and delivery of the recent census. In more recent news, I'm just about to take up a Programme Director position with UCL, so staying within the higher education sector. So I'm just going to share some of my thoughts around digital transformation to start us off, and then I'll hand back to Kuldip and we'll get some of your input into this as well. So if we could go on my first slide, please, Kuldip, that would be great. Transformations, in my experience, are hard, and remind me of the quote, "If you want to discover new lands, you must first lose sight of the shore." And digital transformation challenges are like those of any other transformation. It's really hard to set sail to a newly transformed place when you're not quite sure where it is and it's going to be an unknown journey to get there. So every step of the way, it's the people who are the ones who make that transformation happen. Leaders and visionaries need to have the ability to think differently, to think outside the box, to feel safe, to know that transformation is required, even when they might not know exactly what it is. They need to be clear that the status quo is no longer working, or prevent the organisation from meeting its objectives. They need to be able to listen to their teams, who will tell them how a thing is possible or not possible, and they need to be able to hear their users to really understand what's required, not what is wanted. They're very often different things. Remember, as Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And he knew that transformation was ahead. Deliverers, whether they're in-house staff or partners or suppliers, are the people that will make your transformation work. The deliverers, whether it's program or project managers, scrum teams, testers, business analysts, data architects, etc., are the ones who must translate that vision. They need to be able to take that vision that the leaders have set upon and make it happen. They need to build the infrastructure, create new business processes, implement new technologies, really help embed that transformation. And without this group of people, the transformation will be impossible. They are the ones who will also be able to talk to the users at a practical level, and they can design something that works, and they can hear how users really want to put that product to work. But last but not least, as it is part of that triangle, is that users, without the users, there's no need to do anything. But just like us, users can be resistant to change. They need to be shown the art of the possible. Steve Jobs famously said when he released the first iPhone, a lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. People need to be given the opportunity to feed into the transformation process at every stage. The dynamics of the people involved in your transformation are essential to understand. You must be able to understand those people and their behaviours, and you must be able to communicate effectively with them. Once you've done that, you can then start to think about your processes. And Kuldip, if we move on to the next slide. I don't need to tell you that the processes are the backbone of everything that happens in your organisation. And the thing I love about processes is they start off being pure and lovely, but then they evolve and they take the path of least resistance. They mould themselves around your people and what they think should happen and what they think they'll be valued for. They provide a living link to the history of your organisation. They're what people will cling on to if they're worried about change. They're tricky to change and challenge because that's how it's always been done. And they'll often be wrapped around old systems, both manual and technology based. They can be an enormous barrier to change. So when it comes to digital transformation, which you should transform first, your process or your technology? Ideally, you do them together, but that can be difficult to implement and sometimes just too much. If you do the technology first, you run the risk of digitizing your legacy and possibly not very good processes and creating even more legacy issues. You also run the risk of trying to implement new technology that doesn't always go smoothly first time. I'm sure you all have experience of that, along with other change, and that can build even more resistance. If you do the processes first, you run the risk of creating a new process the existing systems can't support. Either way, you can lose the support of people involved along the way. So the ideal situation is to do both the processes and the technology at the same time. But when did an ideal world ever exist? Finding the right balance for your transformation is key, and it will depend on a variety of factors specific to your organisation. You need to understand what your people are capable of doing, how much legacy you want to build, and what your definition of good enough or done is. Once you've figured that out, you can move on to the technology. And Kuldip, if we move on slides, that'd be great. Thanks. Thanks.
Apologies.
Right. Technology, especially digital technology, is the key to your transformation. But you can only unlock your people and your processes if you've done the groundwork. You can have the best technology in the world, but without good people to support it and the right processes in place, it will do you no good. The other problem is that technology can be alluring. It can be shiny and sexy. It can deliver solutions searching for problems. Sometimes technology is not the answer. It's really important to remember that. You need to start off with a problem and work out what you need to solve it, not the other way around. And I'm reminded of a really good example when we were building the Census solution. We started to design a field operation for Census because we need to go out and knock on people's doors, and we needed to kit out the field staff. We're going to recruit about 20,000 field staff. They would need smartphones for their new fieldwork management tool so we could allocate work. But we assumed we had a problem. If we're sending out field staff for a shift pounding the street, how are they going to charge those phones? Because the field staff would need bags as well, we found some rucksacks with solar panels in them to allow them to just do that. And we were really pleased with ourselves. It would be a truly digital census. Even the bags we kitted our staff out would be digital. Except, of course, it was completely unnecessary. No team member was ever going to be out on the streets for more than 8 hours. Standard battery life on the phones would be more than that. But we found a solution and we applied it to a problem we thought we had, but we didn't. We caught that one, fortunately, before any procurement was undertaken, but it's easy to see why we got lured into a kind of shiny and sexy digital solution. So let's move on to the next slide, Kuldip. And the other thing I think is really important to remember about digital transformation is it's not about you. You are likely doing this job and you're likely here because you're excited about digital transformation. It floats your boat, or you've been given a target to implement some transformation. However, you have to remember that the transformation is happening to help the organisation meet its business objectives. It will only be successful if you put the user at the centre of what you're doing. And that can be a really hard thing to do. Firstly, you need to figure out who your users are. Are they students, academics, support staff, parents, government, maybe all of them? The list is endless, but you need to have a clear understanding. Then you need to find out how you can build your services to meet the needs of those users, not your needs. And remember, you can't represent the user. When we were building the Census media campaign, and you will have probably have seen quite a lot of the media campaign, I was part of the board that oversaw all the decisions around every element. The colours, the logos, the design palette, the music for the TV advert, the wording on the radio ads, you name it. In the early days, I voiced my opinion. I don't like this, I prefer more of that. It wasn't until a very well-meaning colleague reminded me that as a middle-aged, middle-class white woman with a job in around the top 5% of the country, I'm not representative. I cannot possibly tell what is good or bad, and that we must listen to the user research. And for me, it was a hard pill to swallow, but a good lesson to learn. And it was a good reminder, it was not about me. So remember that your digital transformation is for your customers, your students, your users, or your citizens. So just to highlight that and use a couple of real life examples, if we move on to the next slide. In 2016, I helped re-establish a programme of work for the University of Reading to implement the electronic management assessment. After securing the funds, we kicked the programme off and we had 3 clear objectives. They were to provide consistently good student assessment experiences, a fully supported assessment experience for staff, and reduced administrative burden for the university. Putting all of those users at the heart of what we did was absolutely essential. The students, the academic community, but also the professional services team supporting the work. Establishing who the people involved were and understanding their beliefs and behaviours was key. I was really fortunate to be working with a senior academic who was amazing at communicating, and we relentlessly talked and communicated to those users. We implemented new modules within Tribal SITs and integrated it with Blackboard. We got the basics right and continued to grow and evolve. We worked with a parallel programme which was transforming the operating model for student support so that we were in alignment. And the success of that transformation, I think, were due to 4 key elements. Firstly, the clarity of the mission, and we had 3 core simple objectives that we're trying to drive towards. Secondly, the engagement of all users, including academics, and getting support from them. We were never going to get all academics on board straight away, as I'm sure you know, but we started off with the friendly ones. And then thirdly, we had a soft rollout, you know, gaining support along the way, and that made a big difference as well. There was no big bang. And finally, at technology integration, the behind the scenes stuff, getting the student system and the Blackboard working together, is really, really important to have that working. Not very sexy, but absolutely vital. So more recently, and if we move on to the next slide, Kuldip, many of you may have forgotten already that you completed a census back in March. I know that 97% of households did fill in their forms. So even if you've forgotten, you probably did do it. And people were forgotten about it because we designed it with the user in mind. So I was responsible for overseeing the build of the first digital census, and it was a huge undertaking. There's no off-the-shelf products that can do that for you, and we had to build it ourselves. We needed to design an online questionnaire that 27 million households would complete. At the same time, we needed to build analog services for those who chose not to be digital. We assumed that would be around 25% of households, but we were wrong. In the end, nearly 90% of all returns were done online. Why? It was easy. It was convenient. It was built with the user in mind. And when you completed it, if you can remember, you probably didn't really notice, which was the idea. Also, as I've previously mentioned, the marketing campaign that went alongside it was brilliant, mostly because it was not designed by me. It was built with the user in mind. On the slide, you can see a Gogglebox segment on the census, which generated loads of responses, and also Jackie Weaver online persuading people to just fill it in. The marketing campaign was targeted. It understood who the audience was and what the particular style and specific influencer would work for that audience. It put the user at the center. So my final slide, if you want to move on, Kuldip. I'll finish with a couple of thoughts on the future of digital transformation, and I'll hand back to Kuldip. The technology will get there. Wherever it is you're going, I believe it will get there. Of course, the underpinning standards will be key, especially in relation to data and interoperability, and we need to focus on getting those right to support the work. Understanding the users is harder, particularly as their expectations rise. This is especially true in an HE setting where new undergraduates' expectations get higher each and every year. However, the key for me is that we need to change the way that we think. I love the old saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. It's true. As Einstein said, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. We need to think differently. It's hard. Most of us, myself included, have been promoted to where we are now because of the way we think and the things we do. But we need to change. We need to think differently. We need to be more agile in all senses of the word. We need to try things and we need to fail. As Thomas Edison said, as he was trying to create new inventions, I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And it was the 10,001st attempt that created success. That may be a bit extreme, but we're all, as leaders of transformations, we need to create environments where we can try new things, where we can think about things in new ways. We'll fail sometimes, but the failures will lead to the successes, particularly if we put the user at the heart of what we're trying to do. So thanks for listening to me and my thoughts. I'm now going to hand back to Kuldip and we'll have a bit of a poll around what your thoughts are, and then hopefully we can have a bit more of a conversation later. Thanks, Kuldip.
Thank you for that insight, Nicola. It's fantastic. I think it's time to get the audience participation in there. What we'd like to do is run a Slido poll. So we've got 2 polls, so you won't have to shift off to some other technology tool. What you can see in the slide there is a barcode. If you're on your desktop, iPad, or you're on a laptop, you can use the scan the barcode into your device or on your desktop and go to that website. There's a PIN number. The question that we'd like to ask you is, what are the challenges you have faced with digital transformation in your institution over the last 6 to 12 months? And we'd like you to describe it in 1 or 2 words. What we're trying to do here is generate a word cloud. So I'm going to just stop sharing my slides and then move, and this is how nifty I have to be with the technology, is go and shift over to Slido. I can see people are already putting in some one or two words. Again, the barcode is there. I can see 7 people already have added some comments. Security challenges. Wow, that looks like the largest input so far. Please, look, we have close to 26 members or colleagues on the call. So I'd love to get at least to 20 to 25 responses. And please continue to add your word describing your digital transformation challenges over the last 6 months to 12 months. Change. Great, we're getting close to 20. I'm going to bring Nicola back to pose a question to Nicola based on the word cloud. What we can see, the 2 highest, well, the first one right in the center is culture. And I think culture, people resistance, buy-in seems to be sticking out significantly, whilst the security challenges is high up there. Nicola, any emerging thoughts as the responses continue to come in from what you can see?
Yeah, I mean, they're a fantastic set of responses. Thank you to everyone who's participating. I think culture, resistance, amount of change, change fatigue, they're really familiar themes. And I think if you go to any sector, you'll find exactly the same things. And I think this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, is really about putting people at the heart of the change. You have to be able to sell your change. You have to be able to make people realize that the change and the transformation that you're doing will benefit them in the future. But as I said, likely you'll be changing business processes that people want to cling on to because they want to feel valued. Nobody comes to work to do a bad job. And if suddenly you come in and you say, well, this process that you're doing is a waste of time, you want to do this one instead, you will chip away at their values. And I think it's really important to just remember about those people, put them at the center, understand that user journey, and understand how those users will feel. And that's what can help you sort of just knock at the door of the culture and the change fatigue. Yeah. Cool. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I was going to echo some of your thoughts there, but add on to it a little bit around getting end users involved in the design of the change. In the design of the change.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just in a meeting. I'm just listening to a conference.
James, could you put yourself on mute, or shall I do it? Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, I think in my work with organizations, I think the best way to get people involved in what the transformation of the change is get them designing it, so they start taking ownership, and as part of the ownership, they can start.
Oh, I believe we might have
lost Kuldip there. But I would just chip in and completely agree with what he was saying about that ownership. Oh, Kuldip, are you back?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
We can. Yeah, we just lost you for a minute.
Okay. If you just remind me if you don't again. Yeah, I was just saying it's ownership, engagement, understanding the benefits, and taking people on the journey. And I think something that you said a little bit earlier, you sometimes, when you're working, certainly in HE institutions, they're large federated organizations, you might want to start with a small pilot in some area, get some success, and start rolling that out. And what you find is people come on board. There's always an early majority, then you get the larger majority after that following, and then that kind of breeds the success and the change that you want, and that takes time. I don't think there's a big bang approach to it. It's a small, slowly, steady, realizing the value and bringing people on board. Okay, thank you. We had 22 responses. That's fantastic.
I believe we may have lost him again. I think if it gives it another 10 seconds, we maybe have to come back.
Yeah, he's the man with all the power as well. So none of us are able to chip in. I'm sure he'll be back in a minute. Don't worry about apologising, James. Have we lost him completely now?
I believe he will be coming back in.
Okay, fine.
Yes, the small technical difficulties that we do face sometimes.
There we go.
Hello, apologies. I got disconnected. Sorry about that.
Welcome back.
Sorry, I hope you didn't lose. It was only for 30 seconds. I am back, and I'm back into my slides. We were on the poll, so we completed that. Thank you. Just want to thank everybody for your input. Technology tends to let you down sometimes, so I hope you haven't disrupted the flow too much. I'm back. I'm going to build on some of the themes that Nicola has been talking about and talk about my experiences. And some of the slides here are things that I've heard, not just in HE, but these are in other commercial organizations and so forth. Okay, so one of the common things I find is that digital and digital transformation means many things to many people. And I put this slide together because it can mean for the CEO is if I adopt a digital change in my organization, it means that I can be much more competitive and therefore have more market share, or more my reputation gets enhanced in the sector that I'm working in. For the CIO, he goes, well, I can use that digital word to get the interest at the board level, so I get sponsorship for what I want to do. The chief marketing officer says, well, it allows me to think about all the channels and the online presence that I can focus in on. The chief digital officer, or you can relate this to your vice chancellor, your head of students, or the head of academics or professional services. You can relate that to a HE organization. For the chief digital office, about how we can grow the organization. And for somebody like the chief operating officer, it's all about getting costs and efficiencies better managed. And I think the reason for putting this up is that I think it's critically important before you start your transformation journey to understand why you're doing it and to get that alignment. And there's five buckets. And digital is a wide subject to digital transformation. I wanted to show these 5 buckets. So if you know why you're doing it based on getting that stakeholder alignment, it's really important to understand these 5 digital pools. And some of these will dominate in your sector. And in HE, it will be different. It is different, very different. Digital marketing in a HE perspective is about how you're attracting students and academics into your institution, and how you're going to do that through effective digital platforms. How do you run student sessions to attract them in planning phases, in when they're younger age, at A levels through into university. This means something different to HE. Digital channels is all about how you attract, get onboarding. So admissions for HE is really key. So student admissions is going to be a real challenge when we've just come out of, we're in the midst of Brexit. We've had a global pandemic, and attracting overseas students is a real challenge. How do we optimize our admissions processes with the underpinning technology and the channels to ensure that we have the institutions, the university, are able to attract those students to come and study or do that remotely? So that's a really important piece. The third piece of digital tends to be, how can we optimize our department? We might want to just think about how to get professional services better aligned to the academic world across faculties, schools and departments. Or we might want to optimize IT, HR, so digital can mean that third bucket pool in HE. Fourthly, there's a lot of digital platforms out there. So the biggest companies in the world are the ones that have digital platforms, and they have lots of data with them. We've just heard yesterday, Facebook, or are they called Meta now? They have digital platforms that engage suppliers, customers, marketeers, users, families. And how do we bring in those platforms to ensure that we get the student experience right in institutions? And fifthly, there's a business model innovation. This is where there's been a fundamental shift. And we are in the midst of two fundamental shifts. Industry 4 is where organizations are becoming more technology dependent. And secondly, we are now moving to, the pandemic has forced us into working remotely. And the hybrid delivery model is becoming predominant in lots of organizations and institutions. So that's a shift in the way that we work. And the university of 2030 will look very different from an estate's perspective and how they deliver learning and education when you're working in a hybrid delivery model. So the reason I wanted to put these 5 areas here is to show you that digital can mean many things, and it could predominate for your organization in a different sense, and particularly for HE. And it's about getting that understanding of why you're doing this. And it can also mean there can be many reasons of why you want to go down a digital transformation route. Is it about growth from student numbers? Is it about being competitive and enhancing your reputation in the marketplace? And here you can see the 5 buckets and how they align to digital change. Is it about efficiency? So having clarity on why you're doing a digital transformation is absolutely paramount. And particularly when you're in a large federated organization with disparate stakeholders, and starting small but thinking big in a way. So that's the why and the what, but how do you do it? It's complex. Nicola has already talked about a couple of her case studies where engagement with stakeholders and starting small is important. And I think there's no point, a little quote here, there's no point having a map if you don't know where you are. What's the point of traveling somewhere when you haven't got a starting point? So here's some of my sort of building blocks that I've used in some of my transformation programs. I think it's so important to know your future destination. People talk about the purpose, the strategy, and the vision. Then you need to make sure you have your transformation plans and your ideation, your plan, your approach, your roadmap, your scope, your design, your architecture. Make sure you've got your capabilities aligned to the future needs of your organization. Thinking about, as you can say, their transformation leadership and that alignment. What are the benefits? What's the return going to be? How you're managing not just stakeholders, but their expectations. We all know in a HE context that the expectations of academics are different to expectations of students. Nicola talked about the changing technology needs of students. They change and increase year on year, and understanding them and the external factors is really important. And then how are you going to deliver it? How are you going to implement it? How are you going to get the adoption? And we talked about user engagement, starting small, building momentum, getting people on board, selling the value, working with third parties. In the HE sector, there's a lot of third parties, especially in the technology space. There's providers of CRM systems to student record systems to timetabling. You need to get the suppliers align to the vision that you're moving on. And finally, there it's about that cultural alignment, and we've already talked about culture, communication, a robust communication plan, and ensuring that everybody is going with you on the journey as on the transformation change. What does that mean from a HE perspective? My final slide before we go into a poll. From a HE perspective, I think, as I said, alluded to earlier, Brexit and the pandemic has given us a business model shift. I think there's 6 kind of areas that I think university leaders need to be really thinking about in the new norm going forward. Digital assessment. I think there's going to be a different way that you can now assess students remotely in that hybrid delivery model. Cost pressures for some universities. The cost pressures have maybe forcing them to think about mergers and acquisitions for some universities. How are you going to therefore diversify your revenue? If you can't attract students, especially the overseas students who are higher fee pay earners, how else can you think about remodeling the revenue that you need to generate to keep, whilst your institution, keep it running as a business in a way? Digital learning, well, lecture capture is pretty prominent in the HE at the moment, but how do we ensure, as more of that happens, the computing power that needs and the capacity meets the demand going forward? How do we ensure we'll still have some campus presence in some of the larger universities? Digital wayfinding will be still important, that smart campus. And then as you bring cohorts together, how do you ensure that you get that blended learning for students, postgraduates, undergraduates, and academics can deliver their training and experiences to students in a different digital model? Student recruitment, again, with the revenue pressures, I think is going to be a challenge for universities going forward. How do we build new partnerships with business, with global entities, so you can attract new cohorts for the future? And importantly, when the students come out of university, they want to go on and flourish in their careers, and alignment with business is so important, so that you're able to get business engaged with the attraction of students. And it's a big challenge for students at the moment. Anybody that's left university is finding particularly difficult to get into student programs, but as we emerge from the pandemic, hopefully that will ease. But I think there's something about employability that needs to be looked at, and something that's, I think, is relevant across the academic institutions: student staff well-being. I think students suffer in silence in many cases with some of the challenges that the pandemic has brought about, as well as staff and academics. We need to be conscious of some of those challenges and addressing those as we go forward. I'm going to stop there, and I hope I've given you loads of food for thought, and move into my our second poll. I've given you some snippets of some of the things I think are going to happen and change as we build, say, universities for 2030. And the question that we'd like to pose to you as our audience today is, what do you think are the biggest fears as we digitally transform for the future? And if you can describe that in 1 or 2 words. It's the same QR code, it's the same Slido website and PIN number. If you could, I'm going to do my technology shift again and move over to Slido. And I just want to make sure that I move into the second poll and see how we're getting on. So could I encourage everybody to social purpose, user expectations, okay, disruption, scope, career. So as the words get inputted. I'm going to reflect back to you again, Nicola, to get your thoughts. I think you can see what's coming out at top.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, this and the last question are so interlinked, but there's I think there's a thing that kind of underpins that, and some of these questions is fear. There's a lot of fear here, and fear will impact on behaviors. So it's about how can we, as leaders of transformation, how can we address these fears? You know, how do we ensure that we don't, you know, make people redundant, that we don't lose the personal touch, we don't create more unemployment, you know, we don't, etc., etc., etc. So how can we maintain our approach to that, dealing with the fear going forwards? And I think that's really, really key.
Change fatigue, personal touch. Yeah. Yeah, and that user expectation piece, just my bit on that is understanding that the stakeholder group at universities covers from 18 to 70 plus, right? You get the academics to staff members to, you know, young graduates, and understanding that their needs are different. You know, Generation X, Z, Y, they have different expectations when they come to university. They're used to mobile technology, gamification. They're used to talking to their friends over the internet rather than face to face, and you know, meeting some of those technology expectations I've certainly seen is really important. And how do we cater for that? Whilst not losing sight that academics have expectations as well, and staff do, in terms of career development. And how do we cater for all those, you know, in a large organizations and institutions? Any thoughts around change fatigue, Nicola, from your perspective? How would you cope with that?
Yeah, I know, I hear that a lot, and I think it's so true, and there's a burnout there as well. I think we've been through a lot. You've mentioned Brexit and the pandemic. The world is changing. The expectations about the pace of change is that it will speed up. All of that is very, very challenging. I think there's also something around the kind of expectation, and I can refer back to my comments before, that somehow digital is sexy, it's amazing, it will solve all your problems. And one of the other comments in there is about overcomplicating processes. And actually, digital can solve a lot of problems, but it's not a panacea for all ills. And it's about putting it in the context of the rest of the changes. But it's also about us as transformation leaders having that resilience to help us and our teams ensure that we can pace ourselves at the way that's appropriate, and that we can actually put the users at the heart of what we're doing and make a difference, rather than constantly kind of be flogging ourselves to digitize some processes that actually aren't very good anyway. And it's hard to do, and we have to be kind to ourselves in order to do it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Can I encourage our attendees to think about if there's any burning questions that you might have, because we're going to, I've got 2 or 3 more slides, and then we're going to go into a Q&A session, and it would be great if there's any burning questions, and if people would like to put that up into the chat function, and we can try to pick that up and give some answers. So I'm going to thank everybody for their participation in the second poll. Some great data points, and thank you for that. We could go round all these points and have some thoughts, but we're restricted to a bit of time, so we're going to plow on. Back to my slides. I wanted to share something that I've been working on with organizations. A lot of organizations go through digital change, and we've talked about that a lot already this afternoon. One of the things I've worked on over the last 18 months is developing a world-leading platform which simulates digital and IT transformation. And I did this because we all were dispersed globally, working from home. And I wanted a way of being able to get people together to experience what transformation could look like and understand the impact of that in an institution and organization. And what we've done is developed a platform where you take a cohort of 5 or 10 people, and it could be more. We take them through an experiential learning experience. And it's done in a fun, safe, competitive environment where you explore best practices for your institution, where you start thinking about making decisions on how you can align technology and the IT. So that back to that alignment piece around the purpose of the organization, the vision. And in the simulation training, what you do is you go on a transformation journey. As you can see on my slide, you go from being an immature organization to stabilizing the business, to become agile and becoming into this kind of DevOps culture in your IT department to align to your business. And on that path, you have to make a lot of decisions in the game. You have to think about your digital priorities, how you solve those priorities as you go through the game round by round. How do you keep on track? How do you make the right compromises? How you show progress and where you should invest. And it teases out, whilst it's a simulation for a particular sector and it's for a particular organization, and you have the opportunity of this transformation director to play the game, it brings out various learning points across those technical organization decisions, and also some of the cultural and people decisions that you might need to make. How do you get buy-in for transformation? How do you do, Nicola talked about that change mindset, how you need to think digitally first about experimenting, doing pilots, POCs, failing fast and learning from that. So it's a very fun and competitive gamification platform that we've developed. And I just wanted to, in my final slide before we go into Q&A, here's some client testimonials where we've actually run this gamification. And one of those just recently was a leading Russell Group university. And I just wanted to share with you some of the quotes from some of the organizations. And this, you can use this gamification platform to across sectors. Highlighted in there in yellow, the team at this Russell Group University, they've strongly said that the game was great in enlightening them from getting the team to think outside the box, thinking about the different perspectives of IT departments and how you align that to the business functions, the team building aspect, how you're thinking about the customer and the user. Again, Nicola talked about focusing on the customer and user and the value that you bring to your organization. And it really helped and inspired the colleagues and staff that have been on this training session in these organizations to think about how to go about building their transformational change program. So just wanted to share that with you, because as a follow-up to this webinar, I'll be running through a demo of that platform and sharing that experience with you, and bringing along my Russell Group University client to share that experience with you. Why did they go about it and how? With that said, I'm going to hand back over to Harrison and Molly to close us out through the Q&A session.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Kuldip and Nicola. It was great, really insightful, I think, for me and Molly as well. Definitely learning a couple of bits for ourselves. So thank you very much. Definitely really appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody else. There's a few questions that have come in already. The first one, which I think it could be for yourself, Nicola, from one of the quotes earlier from Bear here, which says, if jobs is to be believed, they don't know what they want. How do we gather and respond to user expectations? Can you see that, the function?
Yeah, I can see that, and I think it's a really good point. But what it does is it really highlights the need for a conversation. And what it does is it means, and if you remember my slide, we kind of had a sort of perpetual triangle that actually it's really important to have a conversation to really understand what the users are trying to achieve, how they're trying to achieve it, what you're suggesting that could solve it, and to continue to iterate. And I've mentioned it, and Kuldip's mentioned it, that need to kind of fail fast, fail quickly, try something, fail, and keep going. But to continue the conversation, and user experience and user kind of research is not about having one conversation and going, oh, they want that, and going off and doing it. It's about continued conversation and evolving. And you're absolutely right if they don't know what they want. And it's the same with Henry Ford, but in his horses, he took a bit of a gamble. And Steve Jobs did as well. So there's an element of how much of a risk are you prepared to take? What's the business wanting to do? And it's about taking all of those factors to balance it up, but continuing the conversation and continuing it after you've done it as well. So don't just stop. You've got to continue that conversation to kind of find out how things need to continue to evolve.
I'll pick up on one of the questions, Harrison, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
There's one about decommissioning that I wanted to pick up on. What would you turn off in HE, and how do you get people to stop doing it? Now, I've worked in quite a number of IT departments in HE, and what happens is you get slightly complacent, and sometimes you build up legacy technology, lots of technical debt. So I think IT in HE has really been going through a modernization phase over the last 5 to 10 years, and that needs to continue. And we must stop people putting in workarounds. We must put in proper solutions rather than putting in workarounds and creating technical debt that becomes legacy stuff for people to clean up afterwards. And that's about getting a standardized architecture and understanding the landscape of what needs to be shut off, what needs to be iterated, developed, what new innovation we want to bring in according to the organization institutional needs again, and how do we do that in an incremental way. And it kind of sits around having the right culture again about that, having the right mindset that we need to do things in a robust way rather than a piecemeal way when we come to, certainly on the technology side, I've seen. I don't know if there's any thoughts from you, Nicola, on that one.
I think it's a really tricky one, and I think for me it kind of hits there's two levels, because actually part of the theme that came out of the poll was that actually people are exhausted, they're busy, they're trying to do too much, and then part of the reason they're trying to do too much is that we haven't decommissioned enough stuff. So we need to stop doing some things in order to allow us to do other things, and that's a really, really difficult decision to have, and a conversation that's required with senior management to really think about, okay, how do we create space for transformation by stopping doing some things, and then decommissioning, because I think if you don't start to decommission, you never move on your journey and people stay stuck. So I think it's as well as, I totally agree with Kuldip, it's really, really important not to have those workarounds, and not to build more legacy, but it's also not to stay stuck. You're moving. If you think about the journey that I talked about on the, sailing to new shores, you can't sail to your new shores if you've still got a tether to the old one. And unless you decommission, you will have.
Yeah, and again, just from a kind of IT business perspective, just to add to that, I think there's always this game of balancing stability with agility. So what I mean stability is having robust, reliable infrastructure that's secure. So security is an important one. Look, I've heard of many institutions over the last 12 months being hit with cybersecurity challenges. So we've got to tackle bringing in good cyber controls and training and learning so that institutions become less vulnerable, because institutions are full of rich data and information for the future. So creating stable environments is important. It's only when you're stable that you can really start to become agile. When I mean agile is that you can change with your environment and bring in a new innovation. But when you bring in that new innovation, don't put the plasters on. It's not about the plasters, it's about doing the right things in the right way. That's how I feel. Sorry, Harrison, any other questions you want to pick up on?
Yeah, no, so I didn't know if you was picking up on that as well.
Yeah.
I think it was coming off of Nicola's one of the answers before as well from Rob here, which says, what have been your most successful tools and techniques for really understanding the users / customers?
For me, that's probably a level of detail that I haven't been involved in the actual running of the conversations, but I know that the conversations and having the conversations and making the adjustments and continue to have the conversations as a leader and listening to what the feedback is coming back is the most important thing. So your teams will be able to tell you, well, what are the latest tools and techniques? But again, it's about a conversation and make sure that you can have those conversations in a sensible way and you can understand the feedback. But Kuldip, you may have some more detailed tips on that one.
Yeah, the pandemic has been excellent in terms of trying to use digital tools. So I use a whole range of technology tools. I use Miro, Mural. I use MS Teams with their built-in Microsoft tool sets. Now you'll say, there's that technique? Yes, there's a way of engaging people iteratively. And building using these tools to build in consensus and build in buy-in. It's back to what we talked about earlier. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes small bite-sized chunks of functionality, experience, and engagement and trust to build in working with users and customers. And having a mindset, back to the mindset of understanding that what your relationship with that department, university, college is. Are you a service provider? Are you delivering on not just service level agreements, but expectations? And these are user expectations, or people now call them XLAs. It's actually understanding what you as a customer want, and then being able to exceed those expectations and manage those. So it's hard work. Back to and I would also echo the listening piece. The listening piece is really important to pick up on the subtle nuances in what your customer is really looking for, and I think I was going to say agile, and agile is an interesting technique because agile is a way that you're engaging with your users and your customers on a regular basis to always understand how they're feeling and what they want. Because the waterfall method is like, give me your requirements. I'll be back in 6 months and 8 months, and I'll tell you this is what you want. But by that time, things have moved on and changed. So this is why you need the interactive, agile way of always understanding user needs and showing them bits of change or bits of functionality, the people process triangle, so that you're continually actually showing them what value you're delivering. So it's that engagement piece for me that's really, really important.
Perfect. There's one more here from Kevin as well, and sort of a few of the questions in it. So it says, we all know people are the biggest challenge in project change. What advice could you give to us to bring together siloed areas, hidden agendas, known personality clashes, political battles, and general resistance to change? There's no magic bullet, but do you workshop this at the start of the project, and if so, how?
I'm happy to pick that one up, and then I'll hand it back to Kuldip. But for me, there's 3 ways of dealing with this: communication, communication, and communication. And also, don't play the games. So people behave in all kinds of ways, where they get into sort of politics with a small p, all kinds of personality clashes, etc., because they feel frightened, they feel unsure of what's happening, and they're not quite sure what's going on ahead. And they've learned that in the organisation, sometimes those behaviours work. So don't fuel it, don't play the game. You need to sell what it is you're trying to do, and you need to make people feel respected. You need to make them feel heard, and you need to make them feel part of the journey, and you need to make them feel valued. So if you can do all of those things, you won't be able to do it at the start. You can start at the start, but you have to do it continuously throughout your work, and you have to continue to communicate, continue to listen, and continue not to get sucked into the games. That would be my advice. Kuldip, over to you.
Yeah, general resistance. I don't think people are really resistant to change, but they're usually fearful because they've been through many cycles of change. So they have a fear that the new change is going to fail. Or secondly, they're full of hope. They're full of hope because the new leadership has come in, or the new ways of working coming, and they're hopeful that it will succeed. So I don't think it's resistant to change typically. It's usually they've got a sense of fear because of change fatigue, or they're full of hope that the new thing will work. And it's an understanding where they are in that spectrum as a stakeholder or a user, and having those difficult conversations with individuals, teams, and groups to say, what are the barriers that are preventing you to going forward? And then they have to be they're important discussions that now have to be managed very delicately. And those are some of the things those two things I've held highly when I'm talking to other senior people or junior people about what people feel about the future that's going forward, and getting them involved and engaged. Hence, there's no magic bullet about this. You've got to let people, I always think, I think you need to let people unload. And what I mean about unloading is there's a lot of legacy, there's a lot of stuff that's happened for various reasons. You've got to actually listen back to that, listening to all that, and saying that the future that's going to be is going to be different because of these reasons, because of the new leadership or the new way of working or the new mindset shift that's happened. And that requires that cultural change piece, in my view.
Perfect. I was going to say, I think that's been everything there. If that's okay with you guys, or if there's any more final questions. I know we've gone over time by a little bit here as well. If anybody's got any other final questions or meetings to run into. Perfect. I think that would be it to conclude then. Perfect. So yes, to everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate us being able to give you time on a Friday afternoon. Just to follow on from Kuldip's final slides there as well, we'll be posting further information around the simulation training into the LinkedIn group event that we do have already, and then we'll probably be creating a new one just to give kind of a full brief and further details for date and time, and exactly what will be happening in there as well. And for everybody, any feedback that you do have would be fantastic if you want to message us individually, and for any follow-up discussions as well, emails and contact details are there, or feel free to put anything into the group. But apart from that, thank you very much and have a great weekend. And thank you very much, Nicola and Kuldip. Really appreciate your time today. It's been great to listen to you both.
Yeah, thank you, Harrison. And if we haven't answered anybody's questions, we're more than happy to follow up. There might be one or two that we haven't picked up, but we're happy to do that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly and Harrison, for giving us the opportunity to come and talk in front of such an intelligent audience with those questions.
Lovely to have you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
There we go, final one here. I don't want to be rude, but I do have an option to remove Paul if it's just us for us free to speak.
Did Kuldip go as well?
I believe so, yeah. If there's a way to invite him back in, I'll give him a call.
Yeah, I suspect Paul was one of the first to join, so I wonder if he just got it on in the background.
Yeah, perfect. Apologies, Paul, if you do see this. This is just so we can catch up at the end. But thank you very much for your attendance. Speak to you soon.
we stop the recording as well?
Yeah, unfortunately it says I have to. Oh no, he has gone. Don't report. It said for me to remove him, I had to